Le Nissan Kick-Play 2025 a beaucoup de plus. Apple CarPlay intégré pour jouer vos tunes préférées, des fonctions avancées de sécurité, un rendement énergétique remarquable, puis même la petite odeur de char neuf qu'on aime tant. Tout ça en plus pour moins. Le Nissan Kick Play 2025 est le véhicule neuf le plus abordable au Québec. Achetez-le à partir de seulement 22 774 $, incluant un rabais à l'achat comptant de 2 600 $. Profitez de cette offre avantageuse chez votre concessionnaire dès maintenant. Jusqu'au 2 mars, des conditions s'appliquent. Détails chez Nissan.
Now let's turn our attention to a big story here in this country. This week, Canada's single-use plastics ban faces its first legal test. Being heralded as one of Canada's largest environmental court cases, Canada's plastic lobby and the federal government are set to face off. The court hearing is set to determine whether or not Ottawa was justified when it listed plastic products as toxic under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. As a result of this, the government announced a ban on the manufacture, sale, and import of certain plastic products. But now the plastic industry is accusing the government of introducing a plan with, quote, fatal flaws. Dr. Elaine MacDonald works as part of Ecojustice, an environmental law charity, which is representing environmental groups in this case. They say a win for the government would solidify the push against plastic pollution, and a loss would throw a wrench in those efforts. Dr. Elaine MacDonald is on the line. Dr. MacDonald, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good morning.
It's great to talk to you here. I'm very interested in this case. First things first, why do you think the government was right? I mean, you're defending the government's position here. Why do you think the government is right to ban certain plastics?
Well, there's a legal answer to that, and then there's just kind of the answer about the problem of global plastic pollution. Okay. And for decades, we've watched plastic pollution accumulate in the environment. A very small percentage of plastic is actually recycled. It either ends up in landfills, incinerators, or as pollution in our environment. And we've all seen the images of fish bellies or whale bellies full of plastic. The impacts on the marine environment are the most obvious, but there's also plastic found in our lungs, in our blood. It's everywhere in the world now. There isn't a place you can't look where you don't find plastic pollution. So efforts to try and deal with it as a waste have failed. And what the federal government is doing is trying to deal with the source, which is the production of plastic, and particularly the production of unnecessary single-use plastics, such as checkout bags, plastic straws, reusable cutlery, that type of thing. So the first step they're taking is by listing plastic manufactured items under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, which then gives them the authority to move ahead and regulate those items. And what the industry is doing here is challenging that listing decision.
So, Dr. MacDonald, here's where things get murky for me. And I sometimes hate talking about this issue because sometimes just questioning these things, you're branded as a denier or whatever. And I just want to put my cards on the table, right? Climate change is real. Climate change caused by man. I'm no denier of this. Okay, I just want to put that out on the table. Here's where it gets murky for me is when you talk about the alternatives, right? And on this show, we've spoken to like university professors and researchers in the U.S., in Canada, in Europe. And when we talk about something like the plastic bag, what they tell me is that banning the plastic bag, the alternatives could be worse because of the resources that go into making the alternatives, right? So I just wonder if there's a case to be made against single-use plastic bans because the alternatives may actually be worse if the consumption habits of humans continue. Does that enter the equation here when we're talking about the legality of this law, of these efforts?
Well, that is not what's being challenged right now in the court. There's a separate legal challenge that has been brought by industry that's actually challenging the regulation that bans the single-use items. This is just the challenge of the decision to list plastic under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act as a toxic item, and they're doing that based on a science assessment, which, as I described, has found plastic to be causing harm throughout Canada in many different sectors, and particularly in the marine environment. But in terms of the alternatives, what the federal government has done is quite a comprehensive analysis of what single-use items actually do have more environmentally sound alternatives, such as reusable bags, for example. So when they looked at all the different plastic items that potentially could be part of a regulation that would then seek to ban them, They did that analysis to say, well, do we have a better, for the environment, option for this particular item? So the ones they've chosen are the ones where they did find that there was a better alternative that is better overall for the environment.
And so what are the ramifications if the plastics industry were to get their way on this one? What would the ramifications be?
Well, it would completely upset the government's plans to move forward. You know, this regulation has already come into force as of December. You know, it's in the beginning stages. The production and import of single-use plastic items is already banned in Canada. The sale isn't banned yet, but that's supposed to happen in a year. So it could potentially completely disrupt the moving forward of this regulation and send the government back to the drawing board in some respects in terms of how they're going to move forward with regulating single-use plastics.
What do you think your best arguments are in the courts right now to make sure these measures stay in place?
You know, what the industry is challenging this. One of the big areas they're challenging it is on constitutional issues and whether the government actually has the constitutional authority to move ahead with this listing of single-use plastics. And I actually think the government has a very strong case there. They have a clear constitutional authority to act when there is evidence of harm, and the way they're acting is completely within their criminal law powers, which have been upheld already by the Supreme Court. It's a rather complicated legal argument, but I think the basis for what they've done is clearly set out in the law, and I don't think the industry has much of a hope of overturning it based on at least constitutional issues. But, you know, I've seen many court cases, and you just never know until you see the judgment at the end of the day.
Very true. And constitutionally, right? And the environment, it's a shared jurisdiction, right? It's both the federal government and the provinces that have a responsibility here?
That's right. And as long as they're not infringing into any provincial territory, the federal government is safe to move ahead with this action. And the way they've laid out the work they're doing there, they're safely within their federal authority.
Dr. MacDonald, what's the timeline here, by the way, of the case, rulings and that? When are you expecting decisions here?
Well, the case started yesterday, and it continues until Thursday, and then it's really hard to say how long it will take for a judgment to come down. I've seen it take several months. It's before federal court right now in Toronto, you know, sometimes at the end of the day, the judge gives kind of a hint as to how long they're going to take to make a judgment, but sometimes they don't. So it could be several months before we actually see the results of this.
Well, let's catch up at one point along the way. Thanks so much for coming on this morning.
Happy to do so. Thank you. Good morning.
Take care. That's Dr. Elaine MacDonald, Program Director for Ecojustice's Healthy Communities team.